Billionaire jumps into lake to save Strange. Boy, the truth revealed his own son. Dad, don't leave me. The whisper came from a boy half drowned, his wrists tied, his body pulled from the freezing lake of Central Park. Rain lashed against the city lights as Michael Carter, a billionaire in a soaked suit, froze at the sound of that word. Dad. He had no idea that this stranger's cry would rip open a past he thought was buried forever. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Michael Carter was not supposed to be at Central Park that afternoon. He had just walked out of a suffocating boardroom, his mind heavy with numbers and deals, when a scream cut through the winter air. Somebody yelled that a boy had fallen into the lake. Michael turned his head and saw chaos at the water's edge. A small figure thrashed violently, his wrists bound with rope. A group of well-dressed boys stood frozen nearby, their laughter cracking into silence as the boy slipped under the surface. The child was Ethan, 12 years old, a runaway from a failing orphanage. He had lived through years of taunts and rejection, carrying the burden of a weak heart and the label of being unwanted. That afternoon he was cornered by boys who mocked his clothes and his silence. Their cruelty went too far. They shoved him, hands tied, into the freezing lake. His chest burned, his lungs filled with water, and the terror of dying nameless in the dark swallowed him faster than the cold. Michael did not hesitate. He tore off his coat and leapt straight into the lake. The shock of icy water stole his breath, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He fought against the weight of water, found the boy sinking, and hauled him upward with desperate force. By the time he dragged Ethan to shore, the boy's lips were blue, his pulse faint, and his eyelids fluttered shut. Michael pressed against his chest, urging him back, whispering like he had whispered to no one in years. "I've got you. Stay with me." Moments later, as medics rushed them through the hospital doors, the boy stirred. His tiny hand gripped Michael's soaked shirt with surprising strength. His lips parted, and a whisper escaped, fragile and trembling. "Dad, don't leave me." Michael froze. The word cut through him, sharper than ice. He looked down at the boy who clung to him, a stranger yet strangely familiar, and felt his world shift in a single breath. Michael paced the hallway as nurses wheeled Ethan into the emergency room. The sharp smell of antiseptic clung to the air, and the steady beeping of machines filled the silence with dread. He stood frozen, his expensive suit dripping with lake water, watching strangers fight for the boy's fragile heartbeat. For a man who never let fear show in business, he felt completely powerless here. Minutes stretched like hours until a doctor emerged, his face grave. He explained that Ethan's condition was critical and blood transfusions were required. When Michael offered to help, tests revealed something uncanny. Ethan's blood type was extremely rare, and it matched Michael's perfectly. Michael tried to rationalize it, but a chill crept through him. It felt less like coincidence, and more like a thread of fate pulling him closer to this boy. As Michael struggled with the news, 2 police officers entered the room. They asked Ethan how he ended up in the lake, who tied his hands, who tried to drown him. The boy stirred but refused to answer. His chest rose and fell quickly, eyes darting around in panic. Every question only drove him deeper into silence. The officers exchanged looks, frustrated, before stepping aside. The doctor returned with another revelation. Ethan had a congenital heart condition. Without consistent care and medication, his chances of survival would always hang by a thread. Michael felt his stomach tighten. This was not just about saving a boy from drowning. This was about saving a life that had been neglected for years. For the first time in a long time, Michael realized that his presence in that park was no accident. Something larger was unfolding, and he was caught in the middle of it. Michael sat by Ethan's bed, unable to pull his eyes away. something in the boy's face unsettled him. The curve of his cheek, the way his lashes trembled, it all felt like a shadow of someone he had once known. He tried to dismiss it, but the memory of Sarah Miller broke through. His first love, the woman who had vanished without explanation, suddenly felt impossibly close again. Years ago, Sarah had been his world. She was the girl who dreamed beside him of a future filled with light, but her smile had hidden a secret. The day she learned she was carrying his child was the same day doctors told her she was dying. Her kidneys were failing, and the pregnancy would only worsen the damage. She looked at Michael's rising career, his ambitions and his brilliance, and she chose to protect him from the weight of her tragedy. She walked away in silence, leaving him broken, never knowing why. Sarah carried Ethan in her womb with both hope and despair. Each month, her body grew weaker, but each flutter inside her reminded her of the life worth suffering for. She prayed she could live long enough to hold him. When Ethan was born, fragile and beautiful, she felt her world both begin and end at once. The doctors told her plainly that without a transplant, she would not survive. Holding her baby, she saw his tiny lips curve into a brief, almost sleepy smile, as if he recognized her. That fleeting smile was carved into her soul forever. She wanted to keep him, to fight for him, but her body was failing. With tears blurring her sight, she wrapped him in a blanket and carried him to the orphanage. Her hands trembled as she laid him down in the crib. She leaned close, whispering that she loved him, even as her heart shattered. Walking away from that crib was not just leaving her child. It was leaving half of herself behind. Every step away felt like a knife. Weeks later, fate spared her life in the cruelest way. A kidney became available from a nameless donor, and against all odds, she survived the surgery. She lived, but her arms remained empty. Her nights were filled with silence, where a baby's cry should have been. She had exchanged death for life, but it came with the curse of separation. When her strength returned, she went back for Ethan. She pleaded with the orphanage staff, desperate for news. They told her he was gone, adopted, transferred, lost in files she could not touch. The truth was darker. The manager had stolen money meant for the children, neglected the sick, and erased Ethan's existence. Sarah walked away again, her soul splintered, but hope would not die completely. Somewhere deep inside, she believed her son was still alive, waiting. She kept searching, year after year, carrying both the scar of survival and the wound of motherhood denied. And now, in the stillness of the hospital, Michael sat beside Ethan and felt all those missing years breathing down his neck. The boy's fragile chest rose and fell, and in his face lingered the ghost of the woman he once loved. The past was no longer gone. It was sitting right in front of him. Sarah never stopped searching. Even when the orphanage claimed Ethan was gone, her heart refused to believe it. What she could not see was the truth of those lost years, the nights her son endured inside those walls. For Ethan, the orphanage was not a home but a prison. Other children mocked him with cruel words. "Nobody wants you," they spat, and it sank deep into his chest like poison. The caretakers turned a blind eye, letting the laughter of bullies echo louder than his cries. Hunger gnawed at him almost every day. Meals were stolen, portions cut small while the director flaunted new clothes and a shiny car. When his heart raced painfully and his breaths came short, he begged for help, but they ignored him. Medicine cost money, they said, and money was never meant for him. The worst were the nights when his chest burned, and he thought he would not see another sunrise. He lay there listening to the creaks of the old building, wondering if dying in silence would mean no one ever remembered he existed. The loneliness crushed harder than the illness. Still, Ethan clung to one fragile dream. Somewhere out there, he believed, a mother or a father was waiting. That hope kept him alive when the world told him he was unwanted. One night, trembling and weak, he slipped through a broken window. He chose the streets over chains. If no one would come to claim him, then he would go searching himself. Sarah had spent years scanning every face on the street, every news story, that mentioned a child in need. One evening, as she sat in her small apartment, the television showed breaking news. A wealthy businessman had jumped into the icy waters of Central Park to rescue a boy. The screen showed the child being pulled from the lake, pale and trembling. Sarah's breath caught. The curls, the fragile frame, the unmistakable look. She whispered his name like a prayer. Ethan. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat and ran. The hospital felt endless, each corridor stretching like a test of her faith. When she finally reached the pediatric ward, she froze in the doorway. There he was, lying on the bed, thinner than she remembered, but alive. His eyes fluttered open, and when they landed on her, something shifted. Slowly, almost uncertain, he whispered one word that broke her heart wide open. "Mom." Sarah rushed forward, collapsing at his bedside. She gathered him into her arms, sobs choking her voice. She told him through tears that she had left him not because she stopped loving him, but because she thought it was the only way to save him. She admitted her sickness, the surgery, the hopelessness that had driven her choice. Ethan trembled against her, clutching her as if afraid she would vanish again. For the first time in 12 years, mother and son held on to each other, and the years of silence began to crack. Michael stood at the window of Ethan's hospital room, his gaze fixed on the boy's fragile chest rising and falling. Sarah sat nearby, stroking Ethan's hair, her eyes swollen from tears. The silence between them carried years of questions and wounds. At last, Michael turned, his voice raw. He asked her how she had survived her illness, who had given her the chance to live when the doctors had said she was beyond saving. Sarah shook her head, whispering that she never knew. The transplant had come from an anonymous donor. That answer did not sit quietly in Michael's chest. Later that night, he found the attending physician, his words pressing like a demand. The doctor hesitated, warning that records were private, but Michael's authority and desperation made him relent. He explained that years ago, after a severe car accident left a young man near death, the patient had signed emergency papers consenting to organ donation. One kidney had been removed and stored. The donor's name was Michael Carter. The kidney had been given to a woman named Sarah Miller. The truth hit him like a second accident. Michael staggered back, his hands gripping the wall for balance. He remembered the crash from his university days, the mangled metal, the near loss of his life. He had signed the paper without thought, believing it was just precaution, that nothing would come of it. And yet, that decision had saved Sarah, even as it separated them forever. When he returned to Ethan's room, his legs felt heavy as stone. Sarah looked up at him, sensing something had changed. He could not hold it in any longer. He looked from Ethan's sleeping face to Sarah's tear-streaked eyes, his own voice breaking. "I saved you," he whispered, "but I lost both of you." Sarah's breath caught, her hand rising to cover her mouth. The weight of his words fell over her like a storm. "All these years," she whispered back, "it was you." She stared at him with equal parts wonder and sorrow. Gratitude burned in her chest, but so did the unbearable truth that his sacrifice had cost them a family. Michael lowered himself into the chair by Ethan's bed. He brushed a hand lightly over the boy's arm, afraid to wake him. Shame and grief twisted in his chest. He had saved Sarah's life, yet missed 12 years of Ethan's. He had built skyscrapers, signed billion-dollar contracts, and won battles in boardrooms, but none of it filled the hollow ache of what he had lost. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of Ethan's breathing. Michael sat there, caught between the life he had saved and the years that were stolen. For the first time, he admitted he was not in control. Fate had bound him to Sarah and Ethan in ways he never understood, and now the truth demanded he face not only his love, but his deepest regret. Michael's fury grew as he uncovered the reports. For years, his foundation had poured millions into orphanages, and yet Ethan had been starved, beaten by neglect, and nearly killed by illness. The betrayal was unbearable. He had believed his money was saving children, but instead it had lined the pockets of corrupt hands. His son had been abandoned by a system he thought he was protecting. The press devoured the story. Headlines splashed across screens. Billionaire's lost child found in failing orphanage. The photographs of Ethan lying frail in his hospital bed became the image of a national scandal. Commentators raged that a boy who turned out to be the heir of a real estate empire had once been treated as if his life was worthless. Protesters gathered outside, chanting for justice, holding signs that read, "Every child matters," and "End the corruption." Inside the hospital, the weight of it all crashed down on Ethan. He heard the whispers of nurses, saw the flashing cameras through the glass, and realized his pain was now a public spectacle. His chest tightened as if his weak heart could not hold any more. He turned toward Michael and Sarah, his voice shaking but sharp. "Why didn't anyone want me?" The words tore through the ward, echoing against white walls. Everyone stopped. Nurses froze. Police lowered their pens. Even the reporters outside went silent for a beat. No one had an answer. The silence that followed was louder than the cry itself. Michael reached for him. Sarah whispered his name, but Ethan yanked out the fourth from his arm and stumbled from the bed. His small figure ran down the corridor, footsteps echoing as doors slammed open in his wake. He did not care about the cameras, the headlines, or the billionaire father he had just found. All he knew was that the world had confirmed his greatest fear. He had never been wanted. The hallway still rang with the echo of Ethan's cry. Michael stood frozen, fists clenched, while Sarah pressed her face into her hands. Her voice broke, spilling words she had held back for years. "I stole 12 years from him. If I had been stronger, if I had fought harder against the illness, he would have never felt unwanted." Michael's chest heaved as he turned to her, anger and grief colliding. "You think this was only about you? You didn't just steal years from him. You stole him from me too." His voice cracked, but the pain behind it was sharp. "I could have been his father. I should have been the one to hold him when he cried. Instead, I was left with nothing but questions and silence." Sarah flinched as if each word struck her. She whispered that she had wanted to tell him, but the thought of dragging him into her sickness had terrified her. She had chosen sacrifice, believing she was sparing him. Michael shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "You didn't spare me. You broke me. You broke him. We both paid for your silence." For a long moment, they stood on opposite sides of the corridor, drowning in guilt and rage. Sarah clutched her chest, her breath ragged. "I thought I was saving him," she said, "but I ended up destroying us all." Michael's reply was softer but still jagged, "And now we might lose him forever." The words silenced them both. The weight of Ethan's absence pressed harder than their anger. They realized every second wasted on blame was another second. Their son wandered the city alone, his heart too fragile to survive. Fear overtook fury, and urgency forced them together. They searched the streets with desperate eyes, calling his name into the cold night air. New York swallowed their voices, the noise of cars and crowds drowning their pleas. Hours felt like years, until Sarah stopped short at the edge of Central Park. There, in the dim glow of streetlights, Ethan sat curled by the same lake where he had nearly drowned. His knees hugged to his chest, his gaze fixed on the black water as if he were waiting for it to take him again. Michael's heart clenched, and without another word, he ran toward his son. Sarah followed, tears blurring her vision, knowing this was their last chance to prove he was no longer alone. Michael reached the edge of the lake and dropped to his knees beside Ethan. His chest heaved as he pulled the boy into his arms, holding him as if letting go would mean losing him forever. His voice broke as he whispered into the boy's hair, "You are my son. You're not unwanted." The words carried every ounce of love and regret he had buried for 12 long years. Sarah knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she touched Ethan's shoulder. Her tears fell freely as she admitted the truth that haunted her. "We both failed you," she whispered, "but we'll never leave you again." Her confession was raw, not an excuse, but a promise, carved from the deepest part of her heart. Ethan shook in their embrace, torn between anger, grief, and longing. Then something inside him gave way. The walls he had built against years of abandonment cracked, and the first word he had always been afraid to say tumbled out. "Dad." His small voice shattered the night, and he clung to Michael's shirt, sobbing as if all the pain could finally be released. Under the glow of the park's streetlights, the three of them held each other, bound by tears and a love rediscovered. Passersby slowed, sensing something sacred unfolding on the grass by the lake. For Michael, it was the family he thought he had lost forever. For Sarah, it was forgiveness wrapped in her son's fragile arms. For Ethan, it was the moment he stopped being unwanted and finally became a son. Michael held Ethan close, his voice steady now with a new kind of strength. He told him he would never face another day alone. He promised to be the father he should have been all along. Sarah watched through tears, her heart finally loosening from years of guilt. For the first time since her illness, she felt whole. She was no longer just surviving. She was a mother again. In the days that followed, Michael called a press conference. Standing with Sarah and Ethan at his side, he announced the creation of Ethan's Hope Foundation. Its mission was clear: to fight corruption in orphanages and give children the care they deserved. The world saw not just a billionaire, but a man who had faced his failures and chosen to build something greater than wealth. For Ethan, the journey from unwanted to embraced had rewritten his story. The boy who once whispered for a father in the dark now walked hand in hand with his parents. The scars of abandonment were still there, but they no longer defined him. In their place grew trust, belonging, and the fragile but powerful seed of forgiveness. As the lights faded that night, Michael whispered a truth he knew he would carry forever. Wealth can build empires, but love builds families. Sarah nodded, and Ethan nestled between them. Together they walked forward, no longer broken pieces, but a family healed by love. And in that quiet moment, it was clear that the greatest treasure was not found in towers of glass or bank accounts, but in the warmth of arms that never let go. From a desperate rescue in the cold waters to the truth that healed 12 lost years, this family's journey reminds us that love can rewrite destiny. Michael, Sarah, and Ethan discovered that forgiveness and compassion are stronger than pain, and that family is not about perfection, but about never giving up on each other. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us. In a world so often divided, love is the one thing that unites. If this story touched you, share your feelings in the comments, like and subscribe to Emotional Echoes so more hearts can hear these echoes. Thanks for listening.